Hello friends, the second poet that we have for this week is Kamala and the poem we have chosen is Words. Let's see the objectives, the poet's life and writings, read A Hot Noon in Malabar, move on to discuss Words, the poem we have chosen for discussion. We will see human relationships, reflections and compare Kamala Das's poem with Sujata Bhatt's poem Search for My Tongue. We will see the takeaways and summarize the presentation. Let's see the objectives now. To understand the life and writings of Kamala Das in general, to read Kamala Das's poem A Hot Noon in Malabar and specifically discuss her poem Words. As we discuss his poem, we will have the opportunity to realize the power of words over human beings, especially poets. To study the theme, form, language and literary qualities of the poem is another objective. To compare the views of Sujata Bhatt and Kamala Das on the power of language over human beings is a key to this presentation. And for us personally, we have to learn to use words with mastery and self-awareness. What is that power that words have on us? We have to understand. That self-awareness, if we have, we can use language effortlessly and without much misunderstanding. Let's see Kamala Das's life. Kamala Das was born in 1934 and she died in 2009. She is a poet, a novelist and a short story writer. In addition, she is a columnist, a memoirist and a painter. She has been described a feminist, a rebel and an iconoclast, one who did not care for all those sacred, valuable things of life according to human beings in our country. She is often considered a confessional poet and compared with Sylvia Plath, the American poet. She is a pioneer in Indian poetry in English like Nizam Ezekiel. For her contribution to literature, she has received several awards including Kerala Sahitya Academy Award in 1969 and the National Sahitya Academy Award in 1985. Here is a beautiful quotation on education. Remember the quotation that we had from Robert Frost on education, the ability to listen without getting angry? Here is one which tells us something more about education. Kamala Das says, I think education is full of things that are of no use to you in your real life. Education dumps a lot of junk into the minds of people. It's difficult later to throw the junk out and become a clean person. All her life, Kamala Das was trying to throw the junk out of her own mind and write poetry as a poet, a true poet. If junk gets into our mind, what will be our thinking? It will be junk thinking only. It won't be useful to us and to others. So, as part of our learning, it is always important to unlearn many things. As we learn, we have to keep unlearning. That is really true education. Here are some writings of Kamala Das. She has written primarily poems, many volumes she has, like Summer in Calcutta, The Descendants, The Old Playhouse and other poems, the Anamalai poems, Only the Soul Knows How to Sing, My Mother at 66, these are poetry collections. She has a novel called Alphabet of Love. She has again a memoir called My Story, and then we have a short story collection called Padmavati, the Harlot and Other Stories. Kamala Das was an unconventional poet. From her choice of themes and techniques, language even, you can understand how unconventional she was. The poems that we have chosen to read and discuss are A Hot Noon in Malabar and Words respectively. Both these poems are early poems from the first volume Summer in Calcutta. Here is a comment on her first collection of poems Summer in Calcutta, which may throw some light on the influence that Kamala Das has on Indian readers. The poems in this volume have floated like cotton seed over the Indian mindscape and gotten stuck to one's hair and cheeks and eyelashes until one has made them one's own. They have given birth to more poetry in recent times than any other Indian poet. Kamala Das has influenced Indian writers so much. Whoever reads her poetry would be influenced drastically by her writings. One would start expressing oneself confessionally. First, let's read A Heart Known in Malabar. Most of her poems are about herself. Malabar is a place she lived in her childhood, so she describes that place. This is a noon for beggars with whining voices, a noon for men who come from hills with parrots in a cage and fortune cards, all stained with time, for brown Kurava girls with old eyes who read palm in light sing-song voices, for bangle sellers who spread on the cool black floor those red and green and blue bangles, all covered with the dust of roads. Miles grow cracks on the heels, so that when they clambered up our porch, the noise was grating strange. Kurava girls, they belong to a tribe. This is a hot noon in Malabar. Kurava girls come from nearby areas to the town. The poem continues. This is a noon for strangers who part the window drapes and peer in. As they come into the city, they look into the houses of people residing there. This is a noon for strangers who part the window drapes and peer in, their hot eyes brimming with the sun, not seeing a thing in shadowy rooms, and turn away at look so yearningly at the brick-ledged wall. This is a noon for strangers with mistrust in their eyes, dark, silent ones who rarely speak at all, so that when they speak, their voices run wild like jungle voices. Yes, this is a noon for wild men, wild thoughts, wild love. To be here far away is torture, wild feet stirring up the dust. This hot noon at my home in Malabar, and I so far away. Kamala Das grew up in Malabar as a child, and then when she was married, she had to go to Bombay, and she also lived far away from Malabar in Calcutta for some time, and she remembers her childhood. Most of her poems are nostalgic, thinking about the past, the happy past and the unhappy present. Here is a poem on words in 14 lines. It looks like a sonnet, of course a modern sonnet. All round me are words and words and words. They grow on me like leaves. They never seem to stop their slow growing from within. But I tell myself, words are a nuisance. Beware of them. They can be so many things. A chasm where running feet must pause to look, a sea with paralyzing waves, a blast of burning air, or a knife most willing to cut your best friend's throat. Words are a nuisance, but they grow on me like leaves on a tree. They never seem to stop their coming from a silence somewhere deep within. So you can see that Kamala Das speaks about words, words that well up from her own mind. They grow like leaves on a tree and they don't stop, and they are a nuisance for her, and she describes them in so many metaphors. We will see them a little later. But the whole idea is words are a nuisance. They come up, they spring from the heart or from within, and they take a picture of their own, frightening picture from a silence, and they become a nuisance to her. And that nuisance is what we have in poetry. We can see this thematic contrast between the word that comes from within and the world outside, and there is a kind of growth like a tree, and then there is a decay. We have nuisance and also convenience. Language is a tool, all of us know, it's a tool for communication, but in certain cases it is convenient, in certain other cases it becomes nuisance. When words take on a shape of their own, something like an obsession in a depressed mind, then certainly they become nuisance. And that's why some people write out their thoughts in the form of stories, poems, novels and things like that. And some others who can't express themselves, who can't find an outlet, they are into trouble. there is a close relationship between the self and other. This other can be other human beings, but here the other takes the shape of language. Words appear from within the mind or within the heart. That is why we have the contrast between within and without. We also have something like a friend and enemy. The words can cut the throat of a friend. In that case, they can become enemy. We also have words which we tell, and without words we do some activity. So, speaking and action, or contemplation and action, we have in this context. We have the depth and also the surface, from deep within and then the surface, and also we have silence and speech. If everything is silent, then there is no problem, but from within silently they appear, they speak or they have a sound of their own and cause nuisance for the poet. When we see the form of the poem, we understand that it has 14 lines and it does not look like a conventional sonnet. It is unrhymed, and in free verse we have a maximum of 9 syllables in every line and a minimum of 7 syllables in every line. The rhythm of the poem is colloquial speech. The poem is of course in confessional mode. She just shares her thought, but then the tone of the poem is something like a complaint against words, and she complains against words in writing. When we look into the poem from the beginning to the end, we find that most of them are statements and explanations of where words are and how they grow to be a nuisance for the speaker. Some of them are incomplete sentences. Most of them are simple words about words. Initially we have certain connectives like and, but later on as the poem progresses, we find that linking words are missing. We have all these words pointing to the divided, fragmented, fluid and fragile self of the speaker. There is a kind of play on nuisance. When you read it nuisance, you can also hear the sound nuisance. When she was married, when she had children, she did not have any time for herself to write, and she felt it a nuisance in her life. She used to write after everybody went to sleep, after completing the obligations to everybody at home. Let us see the literary analysis in the poem. There is a kind of allusion that we can identify with reference to Shakespeare's play Hamlet. What do you see, my lord? Polonius asks. Hamlet replies, words, 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 words. Hamlet is known for this kind of thought process, too much of thought, obsession, and every poet is something like a Hamlet. We have a simile in this line, they grow on me like leaves. The poet is a tree and the leaves are words which grow from the poet. So we can say that our hands are like words growing out from our own body. We have a series of metaphors, very powerful concentrated metaphorical context in this poem. A chasm where running feet must pause when there is a split on the land. When we are running, we have to pause. To look, a sea with paralyzing waves. Waves can never be paralyzed. It happens here. A blast of burning air. We have a fire. A knife most too willing to cut your best friend's throat. Words can cut the throat of your friends. That means words can destroy relationships, or even some words can kill people, motivate them to commit suicide. So we have something like an epigram in this statement which is repeated. Words are a nuisance. If words are a nuisance, why should we use them, forget them? But we can't, because most of our human beings born into a society will learn one or more than one language. Kamala Das knew Malayalam and also English plus other languages like Hindi and Bengali. She uses certain words repeatedly, like words 5 times and they 4 times. We also have whole line being repeated. They grow on me like leaves on a tree. They never seem to stop their coming. These words grow involuntarily on her body. She can't stop them. This is a poem about words. What kind of relationship we can see here, except for that reference to the friendship that she mentions. cutting a friend's throat. But then the crucial part of this poem is about the relationship between the self and the world through language. The self as a tree and the words as leaves growing organically but causing disturbance to the speaker is presented in this poem. We have a note of caution to the self about words and the dangers associated with them. Words are tools for communication. We can't use them easily. We have to be very watchful or careful in using words. There is a possibility of losing the best friend through the knife of words. And words can destroy us, words can help us grow. Poets, being sensitive, they look at the negative aspects of words. Some are able to use these words to motivate the world. Here are some reflections on life from this poem. We live on earth, of course, but then we live in a world of words. If there is no word, there can't be any world. We have our fears and insecurities. To express them, we are engulfed by words. We may warn the self about the pitfalls of words. We can understand the problems with words, but we may not know the exact destructive power of words on us. In our life, we encounter endless troubles due to the nuisance causing words. Nuisance causing words, words which causes lot of misunderstanding. We multiply troubles by using more and more words. That's why people tell us all the time, remain silent. Silence is your best friend. Silence will not give you so much trouble. Silence may indicate ignorance, but then ultimately, philosophically, silence is born out of wisdom of understanding the pitfalls of the tool of communication, that is words. There is a philosophy in literature and literary theory that human beings are victims of words. Such an idea is expressed by Frederick Jameson in his book The Prison House of Language. He says we are imprisoned in language, we are victims of language. We can compare this poem with Sujata Bhatt's poem called Search for My Tongue. We have a separate lecture on Sujata Bhatt, particularly this poem. We will see that a little later. Bhatt says in her poem about the mother tongue, it grows back, a stump of a shoot grows longer, grows moist, grows strong veins. It ties the other tongue in knots. The bud opens in my mouth. It pushes the other tongue aside. Every time I think I have forgotten, I think I have lost the mother tongue, it blossoms out of my mouth. Sujata Bhatt is an Indian diasporic poet who lived in several countries and chose to live in Germany. She uses English language for her creative and common purposes. When she thought that she had forgotten her mother tongue Gujarati, she realizes that she could not forget it. Somewhere, sometime, that mother tongue from the stump grows back and knots with English, with German, with other languages. It's a beautiful poem. We will spend more time on this when we come to the lecture on Sujata Bhatt's poem Search for My Tongue. Let's see more of this comparison. Bhatt's poem is called Search for My Tongue. In contrast, Kamala Das's poem is called Words. She also has written another poem about language and introduction, particularly about English. Who are you to worry about the language that I choose for my creative communication, that is poetry? She asked people in India at the time when she started writing. In Sujata Bhatt's poem, we have a fight between the mother tongue and the foreign tongue, that is English. In the case of Sujata Bhatt, in the fight between English and mother tongue, we have the victory of the mother tongue. It establishes itself. The fight occurs within the mouth of the speaker. Two tongues. Tongue means language, so every tongue represents, or every language has a tongue, though we have physically only one tongue. Sujata Bhatt has a feeling that she was unable to rip the mother tongue out of her mouth. It still stays there and grows. In such a case, Sujata Bhatt is divided by languages. English and Gujarati in her mouth, in her mind, in her life, in her thought process, in her living. She is a divided human being because she is a diasporic writer. Now when we come to Kamala Das, we see that the fight happens between the self and the words in a language from within and also from without. The words come from within, not necessarily the mouth, as in the case of Sujata Bhatt. While we find the defeat of the self in Kamala Das, we find the victory of the mother tongue in Sujata Bhatt. In the case of Kamala Das, we find that the fight occurs within herself and also without her, that is outside her mind and body, because of this language contact. Kamala Das is unable to get away with any language, whether it is Malayalam or English or Hindi. She is unable to get away from any kind of language, whereas Sujata Bhatt is worried about only her mother tongue, getting away from her mother tongue. In this case, we find Kamala Das is defeated by language. That is why she says words are a nuisance. That is why we refer to human beings as victims of language. That kind of victimhood or victim nature is not so much suggested in Sujata Bhatt, because she differentiates between mother tongue and English. When Sujata Bhatt uses English, she is a winner. She is able to manage her life, whereas Kamala Das, she managed her life, true, but then she always struggled hard to use English to express herself throughout her life. Living for herself was writing poetry all the time about her own defeated self. Let us see some of the takeaways from Kamala Das's poem. Understand the positive and negative power of words. Words have both sides. Learn to use words properly, carefully. Always deal with words carefully. Never slack yourself. Never ever imagine that you can take language for granted. Watch your thoughts and feelings that attempt to take the shape of words in your expressions without your knowledge. We think we speak with our full knowledge. It is not true all the time. Many times we speak something without knowing what we are speaking. So it is always good for us to match words with their meanings and also the tone that we adopt at that time accurately. Words, meanings and tones, if we match them, we can have some kind of clear understanding in our communication. No one can avoid wrestling with language persistently. If you want to be understood, you have to struggle with language throughout your life. It is also good for us to record words and re-examine them before communicating to the world. That is why writers write them and then read, revise, edit, then publish their writings. But in the case of Kamala Das, she did not worry too much. She published as she wrote them. In the case of Emily Dickinson, she did not publish them, but finally we have a published version of her writings as they appeared in her own manuscript. To summarize our discussion on Kamala Das and her poem, we saw the objectives of reading the poem, we saw the life of Kamala Das and her writings. We read A Heart Known in Malabar, a nostalgic poem. We also discussed Words, a poem about language and expression. A negative view of language as a nuisance is what we have in this poem. But then we have to deal with it. We focused on the theme, form, language and literary devices in the poem. We attempted to look at the human relationships which we established through language. We also reflected on life through language, compared Sujata Bhatt's poem with Kamala Das's poem. Certain takeaways from this poem are primarily about using language carefully, using language with our knowledge. We can never be weak, we can never be slack, we can never be passive. We have to be always agile, alert. Only then we can deal with language. Language can overrule us, language can take possession of us, and we should not do that. If we allow it, then we become prisoners of language, as Frederick Jameson has said. Here are some references for you. If you have some time, please read these references. If you want to have the impact of language on human beings. This particular essay will help you a post-structural analysis of Kamala Das's poetry. You can understand another kind of approach to language and to literature and to life from this post-structuralism by reading this essay. All the best.